power on.
The following is a presentation of the Sovryn Technica podcast feed.
Testing.
Yeah.
Hello.
Testes.
Testes.
We are
Hello,
live as we sound check and mic check. Yeah, everybody sounds good. Everybody sounds really good. Sec, yeah, you sound good. I don't know if we sound roughly similar levels wise. Brian sounds really great because he's got that whole setup. He sounds really.
I sound fucking spectacular.
You probably sound about the same as I do because he's got this whole. He's got the filter and he's got a probably very expensive mic there. It looks really nice, but yeah, sounds great.
Awesome.
Carries a lot of high and treble and bass. Or I don't know. High.
What'd you spend on that?
Yeah,
mic,
it carries the voice very good.
On this one, believe it or not, this is easily the lowest end thing I've ever used for my podcast.
Really?
Yeah, this is a Zoom H1N, so it was about $120. But the nice thing is, I mean, in the arm is $20. The pop filter is like $20.
Really?
But this is a totally portable, runs on a couple AAA batteries, has a micro SD card slot, but you can plug it in USB into your computer. And when initially my wife and I thought we were going to be, doing some van lifing this year, I was like, well, got to have the mobile setup. I have other mics. I have lots that I could go with, but it's just so simple and so small. I love it. It's all in one package. I don't even really need a computer if I didn't want it, but yeah.
What's up with the van life? Is that permanently done or maybe sometime in the future?
Yeah, sometime in the future.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I've got the truck now. So, we could do some modified versions of that, throw a camper on the back or something. We've got options. So
I don't know if I told you, right? Yeah, I told you I got a 95 Chevy C20 van.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So we're decking that out right now.
Awesome.
I'm going to turn it into a little mini. We're not going van life or anything, but it's nice to have the option. Or
yeah.
Take it camping or, go for a road trip for a couple of weeks or something, so.
Yeah, no, you showed me pictures of that. That was pretty open in the back. That's awesome.
Yeah, it was previously a work van. So yeah. I'm going to put a removable bench seat in the back.
Yeah.
A couple of inverters and pretty much drive it for a little while. And then eventually going to put a series of batteries and some solar panels on it and stuff and heat and air. So.
Yeah, I miss those old shaggin' wagons. Those things are great. They, again, when you have all that space, you can just do anything to them. It's awesome.
Yeah, my buddy had one back in the day. This was years and years ago. And he had basically couches along the sides. The seats were set up almost like a couch. Man, that was our party bus.
Hell yeah.
Just blowing weed smoke out of the back. We would party in that thing, go for rides and fuck around.
Mm-hmm. All right. Let's go ahead and do this thing.
Yeah.
Let's just run into it.
Yeah,
3,
roll.
2, 1. And we're back. Welcome back to the 9th installment of Into the Void. I'm here with Dr. Brian Sovryn and, of course, Sec. Welcome back, guys.
Yeah, great to be here as always.
Hello.
Our little cabal convenes again.
Oh, here we go.
Yeah. Yeah. If you've been on the stream, we've been talking and chilling for a second. But hey to everybody, we're back with another one of these. I'm glad to be doing one. I love these. I keep just doing this for the podcast for a lot. So.
We missed the opportunity to call the 7th one 777, and I think we should have done that. We can do it with 13 though.
Yeah. Well, is this 8? This is the 8th one, right?
This is the 9th.
Or 9th?
Is it the 9th?
Oh, it's the 9th. Yeah.
I mean, it depends on when you start counting. We had a 0.
Yeah.
I would say
there's a 0. See, there's a 0.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's how I like to think about it. Yeah.
All right. Well, then this is
that
888.
That way we could use the same numbers.
Yeah.
0 and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Yep. So
starting right off.
What's on the docket today?
Well, no, first, before we get into anything, I just want to congratulate Brian on his new cult. And my
Wait a minute, what did I do?
My only question is like, what kind of sneakers are you guys gonna wear? No, I'm just kidding.
Oh, we're wearing
I
Vibram
just
5
wrote-
fingers all the way. Yeah, no, go ahead.
Say again. Which ones are you going with?
I so we're going with Vibram 5 fingers all the way. Like
Okay, there you go. It's
Yeah, all natural. All right.
Yeah. Also a bit fashionable,
Yeah.
No, I'm just giving Brian shit because Brian's taking a turn into the spiritual on his I don't know, platforms, various mediums. And I know the worst possible thing that Brian fears is becoming a cult leader. So I had to give, that's what the joke was. So in case anybody didn't get that. So yeah, no, that was that.
Right.
But
on.
I've been digging it, and I know that a lot of other people have been digging it. So keep doing that. Yeah,
no, thanks. I appreciate that. I admittedly, and I've said this for years on my show. I mean, I've always been terrified of getting what I call Elrond, where, you turn into L. Ron Hubbard, even if you don't ever want to be. I have no desire to be a leader of any kind, but yeah, people have been enjoying a lot of the more spiritual conversations and, just to share the love. I mean, I got to admit, being on this show has given me a lot of opportunity to explore some of the crazier aspects of all of that. And I say that in the nicest and greatest way. So you guys, I mean, this has really been, being on the Agora podcast in general has been almost a training ground for a lot of these subjects that I've danced around, but have never really spent time just going nuts with. And when there's two other people with you, basically it displaces the insanity. So, I can sound insane, but since I'm with you guys, like, it's okay. As to where if it's just me, it's like if you're an alcoholic, right? You're only an alcoholic if you drink alone. If you have other people with you, it's fine. So,
you're just dragging us under the bus with you.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. So I'm not crazy if I'm alone, if I'm not alone. So thank you.
I got to tell you, I love these conversations, but there's something a bit different. Like, cause when you're alone and you're trying to fill an hour, it's different than a conversation. You can kind of go in a lot of different places and wherever you want to go. So
sure.
I enjoy having, if you don't know, become a patron of Brian's podcast. You'll know what we're talking about, but Brian goes into like hour-long Q&As where you just goes into, it's a lot of back and forth with the audience, but it's a lot of like his own thoughts on a lot of different things. So you get that hour-long stream of consciousness. Hour-long stream of consciousness, which what we do here is fucking awesome, but it's a whole different thing when you can just say everything you're feeling without being kind of interrupted or anything,
Yeah, I can imagine doing a Q&A like by myself for an hour. I could almost, because you get a prompt, I guess, to go on. But I got to say, like, if you're doing episodes, and I've said this before, if you're doing episodes solo podcasting, it's just such a different thing than doing even just two guests going back and forth with each other, even if it's not like a interview show, which is also another kind of structure. But like, that's really takes some talent to fill in a single person, a radio show if you don't have like callers or anything, or like, a podcast especially. So kudos, if you're able to actually pull that off, and you definitely are, because you kind of have the, what I guess would have been called radio talent and everything. But yeah, audio spoken word recording talent. Yeah, it takes a order of magnitude more to do that format.
Yeah, I appreciate you saying that. Yeah, I mean, I'll just, not going to claim I'm anything special, but it is rare in the podcasting world to find like one person who will get behind the mic for 2 hours plus, and just be able to riff and talk about whatever and keep it interesting for 2 hours. And, I'd been doing that for over 10 years. And yeah, I mean, actually, I'm very hard pressed to think of other people that do it. And I think it is tough to keep it interesting. And I say this, I agree, like, perhaps it is a different type of talent, to be able to do that. But it's always more interesting when you have more people, I think. No matter how good you are solo, it's always great when you have other people. And so, that's why I always enjoy doing these.
Well, it was like I was trying to make the point about failing the last time or two where we were all together, is when you have like three people like us together, it like almost creates like a fourth thing. Like it creates something greater than the three of us almost, since we all kind of, riff off of each other and bring our own perspectives and bring up stuff that the other guys might not have thought of, that sort of thing. So it almost creates a whole separate thing, unique from all of us.
Yeah, 100%. So what are we bringing to the table this time? Is it rain dancing? Is that what I remember?
Okay, so I'm going to get into rain dancing, but I'm going to drop a little teaser. So later on, more on this at 11, we are going to talk about Judaism within Judaism and how they are possibly satanic. More on that at 11.
All right. I mean, yes,
right
it
now,
is, but please
rain
go.
dancing. Rain dancing. Because I left this cliffhanger and I've been kind of thinking about it. So
sure.
All right. How do I want to go? This is my thought. How do I want to lay it out, though? So, like, ancient cultures were very interested in things like rain dancing and sounds, different kinds of sounds to achieve different things. And so, during the Enlightenment era, people looked at, they were very rational and scientific, and they looked at that sort of thing as superstitious nonsense, right? So fast forward like a couple hundred years from the Enlightenment, and now science is actually catching up to what the ancient peoples were doing in a sense. So like sound, just to kind of, and you can check me on this if you want to, but sound is used for, like, they use it to levitate matter. Very little. They can only do very little with that so far, but who knows what that will be in like 20 years. They use it as a weapon. They use it to clean and sterilize things, etc. It's used for like hundreds of different applications now, and it's only improving, and it's come a long way in even just the past 5-10 years. So just kind of imagine like what that might look like, 20-50 years from now. And then knowing what we know now, and to go back and look at like ancient peoples, and they say over and over again that they used, I mean, the obvious one would be, the walls of Jericho, but is it that, go back and look at history with what we know now, and it's not out of the realm of possibility that maybe they understood something that we are just now sort of rediscovering. So, there's nothing that exists now that, in terms of sound, that can change the weather that we fucking know of. But, give it 20, 50, 100 years, and I don't see that as out of the realm of like legitimate science. So I guess what I'm saying is I tend to think that maybe there was something to rain dancing or chanting, or even like the Hindi people and the Buddhists with the Om. And maybe there is something to various sounds, maybe something along the lines of like what they call like harmonic resonance, where if you can match the vibration of a particular object, you can manipulate matter in certain ways, either destroy it, move it, shape it, whatever the thing is. So is it possible that maybe, I mean, I tend to think it's true, but I'd like to know what you guys think. Is it possible that they knew, maybe that's how they built the pyramids? Did the ancient people understand sound technology possibly better? Like, we tend to think of ourselves better because we have electricity and digital technology, but it's possible that they had just different technology than we do now. What do you guys think?
Penguin, what do you got? You got anything on this one?
Rain dances are real. Let's go.
To be honest with you, I call me skeptical. I don't know. I'd love to hear what Brian has to say about that if you know any more about it. But yeah, call me skeptical. I do think that people would especially want to see rain. Like, that's a universal thing. Like, there is, there's Islamic prayer for rain, which is not really one for necessarily everything, because it's one of the most important things that you could want when you don't have rain and you need it. And I think, especially, my day-to-day life, rain can kind of be a bummer. And we really take rain for granted, but rain is like something you really, really, really want to happen, and are really concerned when it doesn't happen for a long period of time. So I can totally see why like that is like the first thing that should come up. Yeah, but I don't know. Call me skeptical that some few people chanting or dancing could create some kind of harmonic resonance that would cause it to rain. But what do you think, Brian?
Yeah. So I'm gonna go with the idea that it's something a little more indirect. I think it's an interesting idea. I think that sonic, what would be the term for it? Sonic technology, I think maybe one of those higher end technologies, more advanced technologies that we end up finding out can really do just about anything. I mean, yes, it is used in various types of weaponry. I even have experience with some of that weaponry, like LRADs. Those are very weird. Not even laughing about it. It's a very strange feeling when you're ever being quote unquote sonically assaulted by one of those. I mean, your body just feels, it's very not comfortable at all. But as far as with rain dances, I think the direction I would go with that, I am open to the idea that a rain dance actually did cause rain. But what I would argue that it more caused is it generated a mental state. And this is through the tones of the chanting. Like I do agree that the sound is a part of it. Okay. Created a mental space or a mindset within, say, the tribe or within the people engaged in the rain dance, that would allow for a local weather event, where basically with their thoughts, they were controlling, the local, the local environment, to the point that they could cause rain. So for example, I mean, this would be something akin to, binaural beats like hemisync, this kind of idea, like the work of Dr. Robert Monroe, where he would, suggest that you could get your, using, and for him, he would use what are called binaural beats, and where, this different sound is getting in, is going into your ears, and that is getting your brain kind of fired up to certain frequencies and allowing it to do things that would be considered, by most people, miraculous and completely unscientific. And could that end up, could you use that kind of ability to the point that you could cause rain to come down in a certain area? Honestly, I would say so. A few episodes back of Into the Void, when I was on, I talked about how the universe is tripartite. It comprises of space-time thought, and that thought is one of the drivers of those, of that equation. And if you could tune your brain, and that's where the sound comes in. If you could tune your brain in that way, I'm open to that possibility that's what happens. So I mean, what do you have anything to say on that, Zach?
Let me just see if I follow you here. So like,
sure,
the sound and the chanting is putting the human into a certain mental state, and maybe that mental state resonates with the sort of the greater universe or its surrounding environment to where it can manipulate the environment through its will. Okay.
Yep. Bingo.
No, I'm with you there. That might make more sense actually. So I can agree with that. I'm open to that. That is anything that comes down to manifesting your will upon reality, I'm probably open to. But what about sound? Otherwise, like throughout history, I mean, I know that a few examples that are mentioned in ancient texts. You might know more than I. Do you think that is a technology that was maybe lost throughout history? Yeah,
I do. Well, for a few reasons. It's fascinating that now part of the reason, okay, so we look at ancient history and we have a lot of structures, buildings, not just megaliths, not just these, statues or the pyramids or whatever, though the pyramids are certainly an interesting example. We have a lot of these buildings that are made of stone, but are made of stone in such a way that it'd be very difficult, if not impossible, for us to even emulate right now. And there are many of these in South America. Of course, most people do want to bring up the pyramids, at least that it'd be an incredible challenge to do it. You have, massive stones in parts of Europe that, that have been there forever, but nobody should be able to move, let alone cut. You do have a lot of these examples, and sound is often the example that comes up, and usually somebody will bring up, at least it's like, okay, well, where's the example of this technology that could have moved these things, that have created this? Well, there's a twofold thing to this. One is, as far as where's the technology, a lot of people want to point at Edward Leedshaken, I think his name was, the guy who built the coral castles in Florida. This is a bit of a mystery, even though some people have said that they've debunked it successfully. But basically, you just had this little Polish dude who moved to the U.S. to be with this woman, and he wanted to build.
I know who you're talking about.
Yeah, go ahead.
Build monoliths in his yard, right? Like move big stones and that. Yeah,
look it up. Coral castles in Florida. And he's the only guy that was there. There was no one. He would have people drop off the stone, and then he would, he'd say, "Okay, see you later." And he had like a ladder, and there was this little box that you can see in some of the pictures. And it's one of these really mysterious things and he even wrote books about it. Well, he did write books about it. Of course, authorship, I guess, sometimes becomes in question, but I don't think so really, where he was talking about using degrees of, electromagnetism and whatever. I mean, because he's building these gigantic structures on his own. He's the only guy there, and he's this little dude. And and he doesn't have all the, can one guy do it with the, proper, whatever, cat vehicles or something, sure, I suppose. But he didn't have any of that. And so it's one of those odd modern mysteries as far as doing it. But did he use some kind of ultrasonic technology? Yeah, maybe he did. Is that how the pyramids were built? That was his claim, is that this is the same way that many ancient structures were built that way. But the reason I say the twofold part. So one is that it does appear there's some kind of technology that was used that we don't have a great understanding of for building some of these structures, as well as some of the megaliths, not just the buildings. But the buildings is what I want to kind of concentrate on. Some of these buildings that were made even, thousands of years ago, were built with a degree of complexity, not just that we don't know exactly how it was done, but there's no good reason to even do that. Like we have a hard time. And this is the part that most people don't want to think about, because a lot of guys will come in, oh yeah, these ancient alien theorists are nuts, which I agree with, but these ancient alien theorists are nuts. We can prove how they built this and how they did that. And you might be able to prove, and I say might because they don't always, you might be able to prove a practical way in which they did it. Think, for example, the Easter Island heads. Now there are claims that, yeah, we know how they did it, and they could have done it, like this with logs and whatever else. Okay. But none of these theories as to how they did it ever answer the why. They never explain the why. And that is actually where I find things to be a little more interesting. In why are you building with these gigantic, or why are you building these or not just the megaliths, again, just these stone buildings that, again, they survived until today. And I think that the reason they were built the way that they were is kind of a Walls of Jericho scenario, where they were trying to figure out, how the hell do we build something that can withstand, say, some kind of advanced technology we don't know that people had at the time, whether it's some kind of ultrasonic weaponry, for example, like the shofar horn that people would argue about, what was that for? But clearly they were building things, not just to last, but to survive something that we don't really understand. At least that's my opinion on it. Penguin, what do you got?
Yeah, that's a great point. I think is like to ask ourselves, why did they build these giant things with the level of technology they had and the level of sophistication they had? Why would they drop their day-to-day lives, which couldn't be, but so, I mean, I'm sure could often be fulfilling for them, but couldn't be but so comfortable. I mean, there's always something to strive for in that level of like technology. Why are you going to go and build these giant structures that were often built? I mean, it depends on what part of the world you're talking about, but we're talking about, in many cases, like many thousands of years ago. And when you're talking about the old world, the Middle East and Asia Minor, stuff like that, some of the big temple structures, some of the stuff they found in Bosnia have to be super old.
Right.
and to get together that level of manpower and take them away from, I guess, agriculture is seasonal and stuff like that, of course. And certainly apparently a lot of people had these voluntary confederations where they'd come together and to build these like temple structures for whatever reason. But why? What is the religion? What is the purpose? Is it, as certainly isn't quite exactly religion as we know it today. Some of that is going to have to remain a mystery to us because there's just no system of writing or recording these things. It's basically a world where stuff is passed down orally in this person-to-person communications and so on and so forth. And they were actually accomplishing these things before like widespread use of writing. There's no writing that basically survives. Of course, maybe some, not even really on like some medium that, for example, paper and papyrus, stuff like that. We know a lot of ancient writing because they was on stone tablets and stuff like that. But there's no evidence that these people were writing and they were building these gigantic structures. And again, the mystery is how. The Easter Islanders, you're on an island like that and you're building giant statues for what purpose? We really cannot imagine. And maybe we will never be able to necessarily imagine what was in their minds, because there is no way for them to transmit over time like what that was. But it seems like a whole lot of work, and they seemed awfully motivated for like people in the Bronze Age or the late Stone Age or whatever age they're in. They seem awfully motivated to build these things, and I'm totally open that it could be like some kind of sonic technology, something like that. Very likely was. Or maybe it was just sheer manpower and leverage and ingenuity, but some of this stuff is pretty uncanny, and I cannot just imagine being a person then and having the motivation to come together in like groups way bigger. Like you would need the level of manpower way bigger than they were working with on a day-to-day basis. People were coming in from different, I think, what's the one in Turkey that you always hear about?
Göbekli Tepe?
That's the one. Yes, okay. That's the one. I'm sure there's others, but that's the one I'm thinking of. Like they said, that was built by not like some giant empire, but people from the entire surrounding region. They converged. They weren't all living in that one area. There was no mega city or mega state or anything like that, and they converged for some purpose where they were highly motivated to build these things. And you can just look at all these other large structures and the level of people probably living on Easter Island and to build so many of those things. I can't imagine what would motivate that level of labor and however all the technology they used to do that. So I think it's a big mystery. I'm totally open to science technology, but even just as important, I think, is like, why do it?
Yeah. I'll add in, I'm going to add in a little bit to this in that, in fact, when I used to speak at a lot of cryptocurrency conferences, and this was at the time when even a lot of libertarian types were saying, even more than Peter Schiff, were saying things like, "Oh, Bitcoin is nonsense." Like at least with gold, you could make a fork out of it, and you can do this, and it's not real money. Blah blah blah. Well, that led me to getting into a conversation, and I got asked to be at a lot of conferences, to go over this. Of, okay, wait a minute, but how did gold ever become a big deal? And usually the answer that people will give is because, well, it's pretty. Okay, but there's lots of things that are pretty, and there's no reason, like the process it takes to mine gold is not really an easy process. It's not all panning like 49ers, a couple hundred, 100 years ago or whatever, and just sifting through it in the river or something like that. In most parts of the world, this is a very difficult process to go through. And that's not even getting into the oddball point that there seem to be gold mines that are over 100,000 years old, which there's not supposed to be any civilization anywhere near that. But yet here are people mining for gold. Why are they doing that? And, because there's easier things. If you just want that prettiness, well, then just pick up some pyrite. That's all over the place. That's pyrite is the technical term for what's commonly known as fool's gold. Just use that if you need something pretty. What is the obsession with gold? And the reality is there's not a very good answer. we can come up with all the intrinsic reasons why gold is so valuable and useful today, but it's only useful to a modern technological society in those ways. Okay. It's only useful like, okay, oh, it's great in electronics. Awesome. That's good for us. But what about the people, 10,000 years ago that you say don't have electronics? How, what does it matter to them? But it seemed to matter to them a great deal. And it ends up becoming this real symbol of wealth and power. What's the score with this? And I would argue that it must have either they saw someone use gold in a technological fashion, and so they saw it as some form of power, and they, and so they just picked up on it like a cargo cult, as it were, or that it was useful in fending off some kind of ancient technology that we just don't know, similar to the same reason that they built, buildings so overly complex, that we can't imagine why. I think they fall in the same vein where we actually, I love this conversation of why would what motivates them to do this and to go through this? And there's not a lot of good answers, for us to imagine. What do you got, Sek?
I'm just going to jump in and back up your boy there. And I'm going to say the aliens just programmed us to mine for gold.
My boy Sitchin? Is that?
Boy Sitchin, yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's Zachariah Sitchin's theory is that, and I mean, and that's, oh boy. I mean, that's one of the things where, boy, he comes in and it kind of proves him right, because so his theory was in the 12th planet, is that the planet Nibiru, its atmosphere had been destroyed. Due to, similar to what's going, or arguably similar to what's going on today with climate change, blah, blah, blah. They destroyed their ozone, they destroyed their atmosphere. And so his theory was that they were using gold in the atmosphere to deflect UV and, other harmful forms of radiation. Now, you can come up, I mean, when he said that back in the 70s or even the 60s, and he's laying this out, people are like, what the hell are you talking about? Like that's ridiculous. A, that's not a problem. B, why would you do that? Well, fast forward to the Obama administration, when you have Cass Sunstein, who's, kind of, or part of the cabinet. And one of his recommendations is, let's launch gold flakes into the atmosphere to deflect all this, all the climate change and everything. And it's like, oh, wait a minute. You said Sitchin was nuts, for suggesting such a thing. And Sitchin was basing it off of, his interpretation of what the Anunnaki wanted to do with their planet Nibiru, thousands of years ago. It's just one of those oddball things where, wow, as wrong as he may be on things, there's things that he should have never been right on, that he was dead on the money and way ahead of the scientific community.
Wait, he was right on Neptune, right? He was
also right about that. Yeah.
Yeah. He was right on a bunch of stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's the thing. Yeah. So just for quick clarity. So Sitchin, I don't believe that there was a planet that called Nibiru that swooped in every 3,500 years, and the Anunnaki came down from this planet every time that it swooped in, and blah, blah, blah. That part of it, the idea that it's extraterrestrial, I don't agree with. But a lot of other things that he laid out make a ton of sense. And not only make a ton of sense, but actually end up getting proven often enough. And like you said, Neptune's another one where he knew the color of the planet. I mean, you could say he had a 1 in 7 shot, but he was still right. I mean, ahead of our ability to even see the planet. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I got sucked into Sitchin when I was a young man for a long time, and Ike also, and Hancock, but because they were right. And he just, I don't know, man, like I was just a young man and into all this kind of stuff, and you just don't realize like the leaps that they're making in certain areas, like, I don't know, because it's really easy to get sucked into, at least it was for me. I was like, oh, this is fucking awesome. It's like science fiction, man. It's so enjoyable,
Hell yeah.
So you're like, he's right about this, and then like he's like, yeah, and then a fucking planet comes in, and these beings come down, and you're like, you're just along for the ride at that point. You know what I mean? Like, you're just, this is fucking awesome.
Yes.
And it makes way more fucking sense than whatever the history teacher's telling you, so
yeah.
I got sucked into it hard, and I understand why though. Like, I understand completely. It's interesting as fuck. It's way more interesting than history being taught in a school. And there's probably more truth to what Sitchin was saying than most fucking school textbooks. So,
yeah. One thing I'll lay out quick, and then we can go in whatever direction you want. A name that people often bring up when they talk about these kinds of extraterrestrial or ancient alien ideas is usually Eric von Daniken. And I don't necessarily mean to insult Eric von Daniken, but I think he ended up becoming von Daniken's work. Like when you compare Chariots of the Gods, which is his original text, and his book and Sitchin's The 12th Planet, those books came out around the same time. These books are night and day. Like when you read Sitchin's, it's exciting because it's for all the reasons you laid out, Sek, it's incredibly exciting. But at the same time, it's an incredibly dry text. It's a dry text because he's doing scholarly work. There's so many pictures, and I mean, when I say pictures, I don't mean like a coloring book. I mean pictures as in he's showing you exactly what he's talking about. He's laying all of it out. It's so matter of fact. And to this day, most people who say Eric von Daniken, they know who you're talking about. They know what you're talking about, Chariots of the Gods. Sitchin isn't so much the household name. And I think part of the reason that is, I think that's actually the establishment wanted to promote Eric von Daniken. Of course, yes, then they tore him down, but they wanted to promote and tear him down because if they promoted Sitchin's work, that teardown job wouldn't have been as easy because Sitchin's work is absolutely scholarly. And goes, it's from the atom up, as I like to say, where you go from the lowest possible point, the atom, all the way up to here. It's such a phenomenal text. And it's a pity that he doesn't really get the credit he deserves. And von Daniken seems to be kind of the golden boy. But I think that's totally because the establishment can easily debunk and has debunked a lot of what von Daniken has said. As to where was Sitchin? No, it doesn't work that way. You've got a lot more work to do to try and tear him down. Anyway, what else we got?
Oh, just one more thing on the sounds and the ancient stuff before we go on to something else. But they built a lot of the things so the harmonics they had a crazy understanding of acoustics and harmonics, and they built a lot of these ancient buildings in various ways so that the acoustics were a certain way. But and this is sound is not my necessarily my wheelhouse, but I just find it interesting. But and that also they resonate on at like certain frequencies and all kinds of weird things that like they would had to have had like an incredibly vast understanding of like sound to be able to do. So I just wanted to bring that last point up is like they absolutely had a crazy advanced understanding of vibration and sound and harmonics and acoustics and that sort of thing. So I don't know what that means, and again, it goes back to like, why, did they just want their church choir to sound really fucking good? Like, I don't understand. Well, like, there's not a good reason, like you said, as to why they were doing it so intricately like that. Yeah.
No, I agree with that. And I would argue that I think a lot of original actual stonemasonry knowledge, like genuine stonemasonry, that, you could argue was a precursor or an origin to Freemasonry, was around around this knowledge of how to create. In fact, this I think also gets into effectively binaural beats. Like, how do you create an acoustic environment that puts the human mind, or the body in general, really, into a certain state that gives it effective powers. I really do think that's a part of it. So I'll just lay that out, because again, like the complexity for all this stuff, granted it's anybody's guess, but it doesn't make a whole lot of sense, And this idea of somehow, you just made this beautiful because God's looking down. Nah, I don't know about that, because the most pious people I know like to keep things simple. And certainly, when you actually, I'm reminded of Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, when the guy, when they're going for it, spoiler alerts, folks. I mean, the movie's only 40 years old, but spoiler alerts. When they're choosing the Holy Grail, and the villain grabs the most beautiful golden cup that he can find there, and he's like, oh yes, truly fit for a king. And of course, he chose poorly. And then Indiana Jones, of course, chooses the simple wooden cup, of a carpenter, and like the knight says, you've chosen wisely. That really speaks to so much of it. Like, if you're actually trying to venerate Jesus Christ, all the fanciness wouldn't be a part of the program, because he wasn't, as far as we know, a fancy guy. So again, it's anybody's guess, but if somebody got in there and did the research on it, I'd be interested to find out what frequencies, what harmonics actually do occur within some of these structures.
I just want to add slightly. I don't know how true some of this is, but there is. I think we can take a look at some of the music. First of all, a lot of this is kind of on the very early end, or kind of preceding like the musical notation. So we don't know exactly what they were playing, what scale they were on, what they're tuning. I think there's some controversy over like how they tuned their notes.
Oh, is this like 4-3-2?
Something like that, yes.
Okay.
Yes. And I don't know how much exactly, but there is some controversy, and it's one of those things where we might just not be able to figure that out, because there might be just something that cannot be transmitted because they did not have hertz to measure this stuff. And there is some controversy over that. So maybe you guys got to explore the possibilities or something like that, or theorize, because I think that could be a part of it too, where we could have some of the same music, or some of we can reconstruct some of the same music if it's old enough, or indeed some of the same music that came from Bach or before Bach, whatever periods that music has emerged. And I think if you went back to kind of the original music and tried to reconstruct that, maybe you could come up. I would be surprised if there wasn't a connection, I think, between the harmonics in these structures and that. And I mean, when it comes to the size of these like giant cathedrals and giant, other architectural wonders, and for example, Europe at that time, like you can understand, or any previous period of time. I mean, to some extent, I guess if you have like agricultural surpluses and things are cool, you don't have a bunch of wars that are tearing cities and other places down.
Mm-hmm.
I can see without the internet that, in a day without the internet, that if you might want to do something meaningful with all, with a bunch of other people come together and, party or do whatever, celebrate at the end of the day, every day, and build these structures, build this cathedral, build a temple, build a pyramid, a few thousand years ago. And that might be a thing that people honestly did out of, pre-capitalist, pre-industrial, pre-internet, and for various different reasons, times, as a kind of communal thing.
Sure.
I mean, it seems to be, because like the Egyptians, well, we know what happened with the Egyptians. They had your flood season. You harvested your crops. It was very, very, very seasonal. So it was all this labor sitting around doing nothing, and they all came together and did this thing. And they weren't slaves. They weren't forced to do it, for a large part, from what we understand. And it was just like this communal thing. And I think they probably had a good time doing it, as hard as it sounds for us. It'd be a lot easier though if you have sonic technology. So yeah, it has a lot to do with it too. But it's a different mindset that we don't really kind of fully understand. But I think, I think people had the time on their hands and something to do, but I think also it was a very communal activity too.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah, sure. I could see that. I mean, one of the funny things that I think a lot of people don't realize, why are churches and like these cathedrals, especially in England, but in all over Europe, why were they always kept so clean, and why were they always kept up? The ironic reason is, I mean, there's never only one reason, but one of the reasons is it was the safest place to have sex, believe it or not, because most people's houses were dives. They were shit. And so, like the church was the cleanest place in town. So the idea that the community would come together to take care of this communal building, often enough, I think that was completely driven by, well, their sex drive. So that's, anyway, it's a funny thing. And fortunately we're on the other side of archaeology where we can admit that, and that can be discussed. But anyway, what else we got?
Well, do we all want to get crucified?
I wouldn't be the first Jew. I mean,
But
yeah, hey.
Too soon.
Yeah, always is.
Yeah. So, all right. So, backstory. I'll give you the guys the backstory because maybe it'll slide down easier. But so I've been sort of dabbling. I've been sort of learning about the history of Jewish mysticism and Kabbalah, etc. And I was not really too familiar with it. My only knowledge of like Kabbalah comes from like the Aleister Crowley and where it touches Hermeticism, but that was about it. So I've been sort of doing a bit of a deep dive, and it occurs to me that Jewish scholars talk often about sort of a Judaism within Judaism. Now, I sent Brian a meme because I had my girl make me the meme, and it's the bell curve. And so the lowest IQ, numbskull or whatever, he says there's a Judaism within Judaism, and then it goes up to the midwit, and it's like no, that's anti-Semitic, and then it goes back to the the high IQ fellow over here, and he says no, there's a Judaism within Judaism. So there's all sorts of conspiracy theories that kind of go along with this, that it's like a malevolent force within Judaism, and they're taking over the world and blah blah blah, and they infiltrated the Masons and etc. I've heard this all before, but I think that, I mean, you were just talking about this in the sense of the oral Torah on one of your recent episodes of your podcast, and to me, that's a secret Judaism. So now, what makes this interesting, or actually maybe less interesting, is this is not unique to Judaism at all.
Right.
This is, every religion is this way. All of the old mystery traditions are this way. There's a like sort of a public facing version of whatever their system of belief is, and then there's a separate system of belief for the initiated. In some sense, there's a Catholicism this way, Rosicrucians. I mean, go down the line, Masons, the old Egyptian mystery schools, all of these things. This all exists, and it's just to me, it almost seems like you're trying to weed out the spam. You know what I mean? Like that's your spam folder. You know what I mean? Like it's just, you're trying to get rid of. You're just trying to weed out. I don't think it's malevolent.
Mm-hmm.
And so, scholars seem to talk about this very nonchalantly, like there being sort of like a number of Judaisms, or like there's a higher level Judaisms, or at least there was throughout history. Over at least that's the way Sledge talks about a number of things, very like nonchalantly or matter of factly. It's not. I guess where it comes into being like sort of anti-Semitic is that this is some sort of like grand conspiracy, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is anybody going to back me up here? Or are you just going to leave me out?
No,
you're just going to leave me out.
That's all right. Just a couple more steps on the plank, Sec, and
right. You guys are just
in the water,
inching out of the screen.
Yeah, remember what I was saying earlier about like, as long as there's a couple other people with you, you're not crazy. Suddenly Penguin and I disappeared. No. Okay. So, well, I guess we could start off at the surface level of this. This concept of a Judaism within Judaism. First off, you're right. Also, it's not all okay. All right. Let me break this down a little bit more. So you're right. Is there a Judaism within Judaism? Yes. It's important to note that of course it's always Judaisms, not just Judaism. There's multiple interpretations of the same concept. That's just as true for Christian. There's different, there's denominations effectively, which most Abrahamic faiths have to deal with. So there are times where that Judaism within Judaism is, I would say, benevolent. And there are times where arguably, and it's arguable, okay, it's arguably malevolent. Now, at a surface level, the reason this idea has such purchase and also gets basically shut down very quickly in popular society with the anti-Semitic hammer, which sometimes gets very overused, is because you have this concept, what's called crypto-Judaism. Now, as much as that sounds like people who believe in Torah and spend Bitcoin, which is really cool. Yeah, like, all right, I'm signed up for that one. It's not that, okay? Crypto-Judaism means it in the very dictionary etymology, of the word, in that it is a Judaism that had to hide itself. Now, why did that have to hide itself? Because, as we've talked about previously in Into the Void, the Jews are very much the whipping boy of history. And they've very often either A, have had to hide themselves to keep from getting killed, B, forced to convert to something else, or at least confess. Whether or not they actually converted is another story. And then, CDE could be all different other kinds of reasons of why you effectively had Jews who had to pretend that they were something else. And this is the very definition of crypto-Judaism. Go ahead, Penguin.
Yeah, I want to butt in. I think the Jews do stand out as a people that have existed for a long period of time. They were, stateless. Mm-hmm. They were the diaspora. They were spread out. And they existed as like a substrate. Not a parasite, but an add-on to like every society that they were in for the most part, with some possible exceptions that I'm not really very familiar with. But like they're, and the reason that is, I think they stand out in history is because the point is, it's like every other group of people that could have ended up in those same circumstances. I mean, there might have been some other groups that existed here and there throughout history that don't, either extend to now, or they're not that big or that important to history. But like, they would not just convert to whatever religion. They would not just integrate into culture. They refused. I mean, they kept their culture, their faith culture, which it's kind of a combination ethno-religious group, as we always say, their faith. So in this case, and I don't want to subscribe to this, faith and culture can be very different things, but like, they would not assimilate. They would always be a separate group. They would not, completely outside the mold of like almost every other group of people, where these things are very fluid. I mean, they're very willing to convert as a group, or as individually, and then they're now, history doesn't even may not even know that group existed, or they are just some footnote in history because they are completely integrated and mixed in, and just as their historical thought that are just completely integrated into some group of people who might not even live in the same country they lived in. But you know what I mean? There's so many little dead ends of people who have just become some other group of people if they ended up there, or so on. And this group, the Jews, would arrive at a place and remain a distinct group with their religion, which they are just have this strong obligation, which I totally understand as a Muslim. I totally understand as a believer, but also as a person who was very familiar with the Jews and their origins with the ancient Jewish people of the biblical period and everything, that they have this commandment to like be different and stand out, which, by the way, a lot of the Old Testament rules and strictures are basically so that they are separate. They will not mix with other people. They are not just the chosen people in and of their special, but they are distinct. Otherwise, a culture can just mix with another culture, and all of a sudden you have something different, which in history we look at as a culture. But there are, these things happened all the time. That a smaller group can just become a mix of a large group, or you can end up with a hybrid group, and it's totally smoothed out through history. But this one group remains distinct, and purposefully distinct, not exactly in the same way of the Old Testament strictures necessarily, but in the same vein, in the same basic idea. And they do not integrate, they do not follow the same rules, and they will stay and be there as long as they're tolerated, but they're certainly standing out as a very distinct group within necessarily, like you can think of a lot of places in Europe where they would be immediately noticeable and immediately speak different and eat different food, probably. In many cases not. I mean, throughout history, they will peel off and integrate and convert and so on. And so many Jews did, and so many Jews were in the process of it before, modern times, and Jewish identity was, kind of calcified, and people have, even today there are Jews that are basically, completely integrated into society. Maybe they were Reformed Jews. Maybe they have some connection with that culture for historical reasons. But like, there are still Jews that all over the world that have a very, very distinct and go out of their way to not integrate with larger society and mark themselves as distinct. And that's not always an easy thing to do. So they're a very unique group of people for that reason.
Yeah, no, we're just too fucking weird. So we don't subsume well. And even when conquered, it just doesn't seem to happen. And I mean, I think that you don't even have to have any supernatural reasons to explain why that happens. I know earlier you said you use the word parasite. I don't think that word has to be negative. I've always thought of the Jews as being like remoras to the shark of civilization. And the thing is, remoras are what actually keep the sharks healthy and clean. But that, which actually speaks to part of the reason I think that how come there are still Jews today? And a big part of that, I think, comes down to that the Jews historically have washed their hands when that wasn't considered common practice. And it really is that simple. Why did Jews get blamed for the Black Plague? Because they weren't dying. Why didn't they die? It's not because they're the spawn of Satan. I mean, maybe they are, but it's not because they're the spawn of Satan. It's because they washed their fucking hands. I mean, oh, wow. What a, what a nefarious thing. I mean, they invented hygiene shit, let's string them up. It's really insane. So, you raise a great point on all of that. And the thing is that there have been times where and many times, particularly in Europe, where, under most Muslim regimes, the Jews didn't have to change anything. And were actually treated with a tremendous amount of respect, just called the people of the book, and they were allowed to go on to their merry way. In fact, Islam has been the harbor for a lot of freedom in Europe for hundreds and hundreds of years, particularly even for Christians who, they didn't want to follow the Catholic way of things. They would run off to the Middle East. They'd become Moorish pirates or whatever else, and they could live their free life. So, myself, as a Jew, I'm grateful that Islam has been there as a bastion of power to run to.
You are a second. I was going to add in, yes, it's not total freedom necessarily. I mean, you are in some ways a second class citizen in a sense, but it's polycentric. So it's laid out. You know what the rules are. The rules were set at the time of Prophet peace and blessings upon him. So what the rules are, and it's meant to offer them a tremendous amount of respect as like subjugated people. And of course, that's not to be that's certainly true. But and just argument about the marginal tax rate, like they tax them less than in other concurrent civilizations, blah blah blah. But like in reality, the practice was you had a lot more freedom because you got a Christianity that's not saying, we have rules. We have a strict set of rules we have to follow when dealing with Jews. They have an inquisition, so it's a huge difference between the two.
Yeah, and what actually makes it even, you're totally right, and what makes it even worse, because you're right about this idea of you're still kind of a second class citizen, but at least it was open and honest as to where under Catholicism and under a lot of Christian regimes, yeah, sure, some Jews were allowed to continue to be Jews, but they were only allowed to continue to be Jews because that way they could do all the dirty work for whoever was in power, be it the church, whatever, and say do loans and collect usury on it. But the problem with that is it's like, so you were allowed to continue to practice? Yeah, as long as you were useful. But as soon as you weren't useful anymore, buddy, you're done. And you're getting put in the public square any day. It's where, under Muslim regimes, it was open and it was honest. As to where it wasn't like, okay, I'm allowed to exist as long as I'm useful. No, you're allowed to exist because you're still a child of God, even though you might be considered on a slightly different tier. I'm not going to say it's perfect, but it was certainly a better deal than what we were getting under the church. And so whenever those times would come, where the church did suddenly say, well, Jews being Jews aren't useful anymore. This happened often in Spain. Then there would be forced conversions. And would there be people who would say, okay, sure, I profess Jesus is the Christ, but would continue secretly to practice Torah and read the Talmud? Yes, of course there were. Of course there were. And why wouldn't they? Like, we were talking earlier about why would they build these complex buildings? We don't understand. It doesn't make sense. Well, this isn't a situation where it doesn't make sense. Of course we know why they would do this. So this, and would they perhaps even usurp and subvert within the power structure that existed in Christian Europe at the time, to allow for more freedom of expression and religion, and for, their people to depending upon the denomination, hopefully get to the point where they could build the third temple again, or build the third temple, at some point? Well, sure. Again, nobody would think that that's insane. So that's why I bring up crypto Judaism as saying, now it gets labeled sometimes as being nefarious, and there are groups that we could talk about where maybe it was, but on the other side of it, no, it's what many people would do. And it's not even cowardly, it's the way to make sure that this tradition that for Jews is tantamount to the survival of the universe, as well as everyone within it, for them to continue that. And it's really key. So Sek, what do you got?
Well, two things. So so number one, why are Jews singled out? As we discussed, there's been very similar, having to hide your faith in various reasons, or having to hide the higher levels of your faith, or your beliefs, or whatever thing. Like, this is not unique to Jews. So why are Jews singled out as this must be nefarious? Number one. But number two, certain people hearing the conversation, even just the conversation that we're having, would call us anti-Semitic, for even suggesting that there is a Judaism with a Judaism. But if I were to say the same thing about the Catholics or the Masons, it's no big deal. So
Right.
why are the Jews singled out in both senses? Well, for the two different reasons I just said. Why are they? Is it just anti-Semitism? And don't worry, I'm going to call them satanic in a minute. But is it just anti-Semitism? Is that all there is to it? And then also, why is this such an uncomfortable conversation to talk about? Do you know what I mean? You think in some sense it should be kind of celebrated. There's there's the boring Judaism, but then there's this really cool shit once you get to level 50 or whatever the thing, and
Right.
you think it'd be kind of celebrated. There's this whole other thing. Once you you do all the stuff that you have to do, and you get through all the boring stuff, there's a whole bunch of other cool stuff. And,
Yeah.
That's how the Masons kind of have operated for centuries as well, So, I don't understand why it's assumed to be malevolent.
Well, so I think you have a few things at play. One is the reason it's uncomfortable to talk about is, of course, because of the Holocaust. So now everybody's, kind of walking on eggshells, because you can so easily be labeled a neo-Nazi or something. Okay. So that part I think is, more on the obvious end. There might be other parts to it, but that's one.
Okay. Fair point.
Yeah. As far as, why do they keep getting looked at? Because certainly the Jews were persecuted long before Hitler. And in fact, before Hitler, it wasn't even a problem, or it seems, for a lot of people. I think a part of it is the fact that the Jews have continued on where so many other civilizations have not. And so that leads a lot of people to think wait a minute, how the hell are they still here? This doesn't make sense. They must be the ones pulling all the strings. That's how they're still here. I think that's what goes through a lot of people's minds. But another part of it is that Judaism is incredibly insular in that for most of Jewish history, it didn't try to convert people. And today it doesn't try to convert people. I think that kind of bothers people because that does, even though that's a part of, shall we say, the faith or the culture within Judaism, for a lot of people, I think they see that as very strange and elitist. And so that leads to another problem. because there is this inherent, and it really is in there. Like, it really is a part of the sacred text within Judaism. There is an elitism that, at face value, really you can't escape. The other part of it is, and I think this has been true since the time of the Greeks and even to today, is most religions up until say, maybe like Islam or even Christianity and so on, which, you could argue are continuations of the tradition of Abraham. Most other religions around the world have very, for example, if you went up to an ancient Roman, you could actually point at where their God is, and theoretically you could hold their God hostage, theoretically, right? Like, you could point at it. And I think one of the big problems throughout history with the Jews is that their God is a hidden God. Their God's an unseen God. And so you can't, when you ask a Jew, where's your God? And the Jew says, well, it's everywhere. That bothers people. And so it bothers people because it's weird, and it bothers people because, you don't have a choke point. You don't have a way that I can control you because your God's just everywhere. And I think a lot of people miss this because we have a Western concept of God because of Christianity and some others, that doesn't meld with how gods are thought of throughout much of the world, and certainly historically, where gods were something either even that you had something in your house representative of or whatever. But this idea of, no graven images and all that's a very alien notion to 90% of the planet throughout history. And I think that always bothers people because it feels like they can't actually attack at the very heart of your existence, which would be your faith. So that's a part of it as well. What else do we have on that as far as Judaism within Judaism? I mean, we can get into more stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it does have to do with, like you said, the sense of superiority and or elitism, whatever. I guess, superiority as a people, and that is the reason that they you have to look at things from a temporal perspective. That's the reason they're still here. There's no reason for them to have not over time just kind of eroded into like the various places and cultures of the places they were. And like I said, some did, of course, but yeah, I mean, it really is truly distinct. Like, there's no other really group of people that have gone to so many places and existed and still exist to this day as like a separate group of people, sort of in a odd turn of events in the past century. But like, to even get to this point is from the point in time when they started is pretty crazy. Yeah, pretty unprecedented. I mean, they're pretty unprecedented. They're pretty much a unique group to have done that. So, and it has to definitely come from the idea that they are like a special people and a stronger sense of that than others. And I mean, now it makes sense. I mean, nationalism itself doesn't even come till circa 1800, give or take, depending on what exact form. I mean, this is not that. This is not nationalism. This is something entirely different, and it's something that they've held to for literally thousands of years.
Yeah, no, totally. I mean, and I think this is one of the many reasons I don't agree with the state of Israel, because that ultimately some of the resiliency that Jews have disappears when they have a land, in my opinion, because when you have no land, you have no government, no lords, and all you are is just a people and a culture. You're basically an idea, and you can't kill ideas. And that's why everyone else falls, because they identify themselves with, I mean, everyone else, it feels like, not everyone else, I shouldn't say that. I don't, I'm not going to go rah here, but so many other peoples, nations are real estate agents effectively. And, you can conquer a land, so if your identity is based around a land, I mean, you've got a weakness there. As to where what's amazing, with Jews is, for the past 2,000 years, they haven't really had one. And I think that's a good thing. The fact that they are, like I said, they're remoras to the sharks of civilization. That's a good thing. And that's what can allow you to survive, because you identify from your ideas, from your books, not from some specific geography. or that your God has to be in Athens, or your God has to be wherever. There's a real strength, resiliency, and power in that that I think Jews lose when they start to identify with a specific piece of real estate like the nation of Israel.
All right, so let's get canceled.
Yeah, let's do it.
So, again, back to I've been listening to that series by Sledge on Kabbalah. I'm actually listening to it again.
Mm-hmm.
And then, so I asked you the question because it seems that Kabbalah is one of the Judaisms within Judaism, and would you agree?
Yep.
Okay. So it seems to describe God as a changing process, which
Mm-hmm.
was that phrase was mentioned several times in the series, and then that Kabbalah could make you the Messiah, or a Messiah consciousness, or something along those lines, a God-like, through a series of various systems and whatever. So, I think the secret Judaism actually is satanic. Now, here's what I mean. I don't mean this is a bad thing either. So, there's several ways that people use the word satanic. One, you literally worship the Satan, or they mean evil, right? That's not what I mean. Or you're a spicy atheist and read a lot of Ayn Rand, such as like the LaVey Church of Satan, whatever the thing. That was me as a young teenager, right? There's that. Then there's the other way that Christians often use it, in the sense that you're attempting to dethrone God, become God, play God. What's the other word? Some other, to go against the sort of the natural order, or God's will, or
sure, I will be like the Most High.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
To unseat God, and that's the sense I'm using that term.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Is I think they actually are, because that's how they are describing God and the universe and their abilities to become the Most High is very much fits into that third definition of satanic. So the problem being is they're right for the wrong reasons. They're right, but it's not. I don't see it as malevolent at all.
Mm-hmm.
I don't see anything wrong with it, and I also don't necessarily think it's. We can go to a whole nother conversation about like the origins of Satan and Lucifer and the snake and all that kind of stuff too. But I don't think it's an evil, or what was the word I used? It's not
malevolent.
It's not malevolent. Yes, it's not. Mm-hmm. I don't think it is. But you could, in some sense, there is some there, I guess, in the way that certain Christians use that term, that they're technically correct.
Right. Yeah.
Okay,
so
you agree. Okay. Well, we're all getting fucking strung up now.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, here's the thing. I mean, people don't like secrets. And I get, well, actually it's a paradoxical thing. People very much like secrets. They like being in the know. They just don't like not being in the know. So they like secrets if they're in on it. They don't like secrets if they're not. Okay. And with that in mind, when you find out that there are all these secret aspects to Judaism, professedly, openly, that these exist, and they do. And Kabbalah is one of those, even though there have been varying opinions on that. I'll talk about that in a second. Okay. This is the same thing that happens to Freemasonry. Like, why do people always blame Freemasonry, even though, kind of common sense just applying common sense to some of these conspiracy theories would show no, the Freemasons can't be behind this. But people freak out about Freemasonry because it has all of these secrets that you're not supposed to know. I mean, the thing is, newsflash today, you can go online on YouTube and you can figure out most of those secrets, all the handshakes, all the signals, all the crap. I mean, it's there. And really, there have always been books out there that lay out the whole deal about Freemasonry. Freemasonry was only secret and useful in taking down King George, or getting him out of America anyway. And maybe some stuff that happened in Italy as well, in gangster fashion. But inherently, there's really not that much secret about Freemasonry, at least not anymore. Anyway, so within Judaism, there are countless times within whatever venerated text you want to pull out where it's saying, okay, there are things that we don't write down, that we pass down 1-to-1, master to apprentice. Kind of sounds like the Sith out of Star Wars, right? The rule of two. There's only two there are, master and apprentice, and this knowledge is only getting passed down that way. And this bothers people, and it leads people into thinking, and it gets worse because also, that's at a very superficial level, because the reason that a lot of this knowledge doesn't get expressed openly, if you were to believe the rabbis or the sages as to why that doesn't happen, it's because it's just too dangerous for everybody to have access to this information. Okay. It's akin to saying, and here, if we really want to get canceled, it's akin to saying like, yeah, maybe we shouldn't tell everybody how to build a nuclear bomb because then we might not have a planet anymore. Right. And that's, sort of the logic that these sages were running off of thousands of years ago, as to why they wouldn't pass this down. Now the oral Torah, and I know I talked about this in a recent Patreon Q&A, like we mentioned at the top of this episode. The oral Torah was never written down. It was supposed to be, passed down through the priestly lineage, through the Levites, throughout history. But then it got to a point where Jewish existence was so threatened by the Romans that, the sages at the time, the Sanhedrin at the time, basically said, we got to start writing this stuff down or we might lose it forever. And so that's kind of the thing is, or one thing standing in the idea that, okay, this isn't necessarily nefarious. It's that, look, if we realize that we could lose all of this, we're going to make it public because this knowledge has to stay, because without it, we'll be in an eternal hell on earth effectively. So, I mean, there's a lot of complexities around that, but that's the idea. Now, the thing is that even in the oral Torah, which is collected in the Mishnah, even in the Mishnah says there are still things we can't talk about, that you cannot write down. It doesn't matter how dangerous this is. We cannot write this shit down. And the hope was, when you read some of the sages, particularly in the Talmud and other places, was that even if we don't write these things down, people could still figure it out later on, as long as we give them just enough information. Okay. And that speaks to a broader point, but effectively the three things, again, that the Mishnah says we couldn't write down. There were sexual practices that were not allowed to be written down. There were aspects of the account of creation, and there were aspects of the account of the chariot. Now, the account of the chariot is where mysticism / Kabbalah, really comes in. So these things were not allowed to be written down whatsoever. And when you find out about that, and you don't know what those things are, whether you're Jew or not, you're like, wait a minute, what are these secrets? I want to know. Why can't I know? If I can't know, it must be nefarious because you think that, or because something bad is going on behind my back, because there's this assumption that people are inherently evil or something along those lines. Okay. But that knowledge did get passed down. It's not that knowledge didn't disappear, and it got passed down to, within Judaism, what they would consider to be the right people, whoever that happens to be, whatever rabbi or sages that it was necessary for it to get passed down. Eventually, though, even that information, arguably within Judaism today, it would be argued that it's not hidden anymore. It's in the Zohar, which is another collection of books and is kind of the primary text of Kabbalah. So today we could sort of say that no, there's no more hidden information. It's all out there. As long as you know Hebrew or Aramaic, you can go read it. And even a lot of it has been translated in English and you can read it there. And, there's no more of these secrets. What you effectively ran into in, say, the 15th century and so on was you had, which we've talked about on Into the Void in the past, you had basically the Holocaust that was occurring against Jews in Spain. And when that started to occur, you had the Kabbalists of their day say, okay, look, I know we've been keeping Kabbalah to ourselves, but this is so important. We need to bring the Messianic age on right now. So we're going to start teaching everybody Kabbalah. And so that's the part that people miss, is that there have been multiple occasions within Judaism over the past 2,000 years where the greatest minds in Judaism did come out and say, no, we're not going to keep the secret anymore. We're going to tell everybody about it. So this idea that, is there a Judaism within Judaism? Absolutely there is. Again, it's not a bad thing. It's a part of the program, for varying reasons. Again, they didn't want to hand over all the nukes or whatever, whatever your logical argument may be. It's always been there. And there have been times where the Jews have said, okay, no, we can't keep the secret anymore. We need to, just to survive or to bring on, the paradise that we want, we've got to start letting it out. We got to start getting it out there. What do you got, Sek?
Do you think that all of the information is actually out there, or do you think there's more?
Yeah, no.
Yeah.
No.
I kind of had a funny feeling.
Yeah, I can say this. I can say this with firsthand knowledge that no, the Zohar is not everything that the Mishnah was talking about. There are plenty of sexual practices, accounts of creation, and accounts of the chariot that have never been written down.
So I don't think that this is bad or evil, and I even said this to you when we were talking about this in a message. I'm like, I don't think this is bad or evil, and I understand the logic and the argument behind it. I just prefer it another way. I'm more like the guys that wrote down the Zohar. No, we just put all the information out there, and whatever happens will happen. And I think we, in the end, will be better off with all the information. This is why I'm not a giant fan of Aleister Crowley. I've had a back and forth relationship and feelings about Aleister Crowley at various points in my life. But the one thing I did like is he left the Golden Dawn, and he literally just started putting information out there. Just here, anybody that wants this, here you go. Yeah. And he developed his own, system of magic and that, and what have you, of spirituality. But basically his thing was kind of like Martin Luther in the sense that no, everybody needs to be this needs to be democratized. And that's kind of where I sit with all spiritual practices, all information, everything. I think everyone should have access to it. I don't like gatekeeping at all. Yeah. And I don't think it'd be like nukes. Everybody can get their hands on nukes right now. Yes. You just wouldn't. The ability and the science to make nukes. You might have the feds show up at your house, but it's on the internet. You're right. But you would have to literally sit down and learn physics to be able to do it. But it's on the internet. Why is nobody making nukes? Well, partially probably because the feds will show up, but also you got to learn fucking physics. Yes. So if you just put the information out there, it's going to sort of self-select to people who just aren't into it and don't have the willpower to sit down and fucking read all this. You know what I mean? So I think that's the better way to go. Yeah. I might push back on that a little bit just to have fun. But, I agree. I'm such a proponent of open source in everything. Have it all out there, have the knowledge out there, blah, blah, blah. At the same time, of course, I'm also a heavy proponent of privacy. But of course, I think the best way to have privacy is to open source everything so you know exactly how to really achieve privacy. I think that all right, so here's part of the problem. Let's say, for example, with Kabbalah, let's say with this Judaism within Judaism. Okay. And I might give people a couple books at the end of this to go check out if they want to read, about this concept of Judaism within Judaism with a very respectful bent on it. But Kabbalah is more than what can be written down. I would argue that any viable spirituality, any spirituality that has any real
benefit, to the individual within it, is something that is more than could possibly ever be written down. And so to some degree, you can't entirely open source, say, for example, Kabbalah, though there's other schools as well that I think hold, like Sufism and some, like there's a lot of these other schools I think have validity and are just another path on the same mountain. Okay. But with Kabbalah, like when the system was set up, that it was only allowed to be taught, really, again, by, to use the George Lucasism, by a rule of two, where there was a master and apprentice. I think there was a very good reason for that. In that it's such a intimate and personal practice. And to kind of prove my point, just so I'm not like just making things up. Again, one of the three things that the Mishnah said that they couldn't write down were some of the sexual practices. Well, that's a key part of Kabbalah, even though a lot of people who would profess to be Kabbalists, like Hasidim and some others today, probably don't give a shit about that. But anyway, it's a very intimate thing. And in that, it doesn't lend itself to being taught to the masses. Okay. That doesn't mean you should exclude anybody, but it's also something that by its very nature cannot be really, I don't think can be efficaciously taught to everybody. I mean, I think there's a level at which it can be taught to everybody. And this is something I've wrestled with in my own work, in that, like, I'm telling people about Kabbalah, they're asking me about it. I also think that it's something that's genuinely viable for achieving freedom in your life, which is part of the reason that I espouse it. But also, technology does, admittedly, kind of to sort of disprove myself in some way, technology does democratize the ability to garner knowledge and to spread knowledge, because, a podcast is a one-way street, usually, right? Like it's my voice going out to however many people, happen to listen to it. It's usually not interactive, or at least not with me. And so in that sense, it is kind of a very personal thing. It is almost, even though it's not one-on-one, it's like 1 on 100, but in the same way, it's really one-on-one, because, but then because it's a one-way street, also, it still runs into the same problem that I'm discussing, in that, I can't immediately get feedback from the student, say, not to say that I'm a teacher, but I think you get my point. So ultimately what I'm saying is, like, I don't think that someone should be denied access to it. But at the same time, I don't know that when you get, especially the further you get into it, when you become a level 80 paladin or something, like that's not something that can be mass distributed. And it absolutely is something that cannot be written down. It's not something that can be made so readily available. My other point that I want to break in on that is, I see Kabbalah, like, I consider anarchism, and I'm not the only Jewish scholar, I guess I'll say. I'm not the only Jewish scholar that would suggest this. Kabbalah, anarchism is an inherent aspect of Kabbalah. And in the same vein, like with anarchism, which, we're big on that and we're trying to make that a thing. I never expect, and you guys can correct me on this if you feel differently, and it's fine if you do. There's plenty of people I respect who feel differently about this. I don't think anarchism is something for the masses. I think anarchism itself is, if you wanted to coin a term, could almost be seen as elitist, because I think it takes a very special person to be able to be responsible for themselves and their own actions. Most people, can most people achieve that? Maybe, but like people who have already been around 50, 60 years, I don't know. Yeah, you can teach an old dog new tricks. You really can. But at the same time, I don't know. Myself, I don't see anarchism as something like the world, in my opinion, the entire planet Earth is never going to be some kind of anarchist paradise. I don't believe it. And I see no evidence for that. And most of actually other, like Gustav Landauer, other Kabbalist anarchists from even 100 years ago, would say that anarchism isn't for everybody. it's only for those that, that can take it effectively. What do you got, Sec?
So I strongly disagree.
Yeah, no, it's okay. Go for it.
So I don't think we're weirdos and nerds, right?
Yep.
Like the entire world, it takes a certain kind of person to like be into philosophy and political theory and fucking weird or obscure spiritual practices and stuff. Like that's a certain kind of fucking weirdo.
Yeah.
No, so you're right. The entire world is never going to be philosophically anarchist. Never going to happen. It's just never going to happen. People are uninterested. However, I do think that what makes you think that currently in our current society that the world will never be, people will never be anarchists, is that people. Okay, so people act in their own. We use the term egoists because we're both fans of Stirner, but everyone's an egoist. Stirner's just describing what is. He wasn't laying out some kind of philosophy or something.
Right.
He's just describing what is. Everyone's an egoist. Everyone's acting in their own self-interest.
Yes.
Based upon basically, incentives. They're just coming up with sort of various narratives and justifications for why they're doing these things. So what you're seeing now is just people acting in their own self-interest based upon incentives. But if the incentives were different and they could, see these systems or lack of systems work better for them in their bread and butter stuff, the day-to-day, not some philosophical utopia or something like that, but just like these, and I think a stateless society would work better for most people, except for those who crave power. So I just think that, there's the old very elitist trope that 10% of people move society and, 10% fight against it. And the other 80% just kind of go along for the ride.
Yep.
And that sounds like a dick thing to say, but there probably is some truth to that. I think just most people are uninterested. They just want to go about, I don't mean this in like a mean way. They just want to go about their fucking lives. They don't care about your high-minded philosophy or whatever that shit. They're trying to go play fucking ball with their kids and, grill some fucking whatever at the end of the day and just, have a good time. That's what they're, they live their life. That's what they're trying to do. They're not worried about your fucking nonsense, so
yeah,
I understand that, and I think that's most people. But I think that if the situation was different, I think people would just sort of that sounds good. They would just choose it merely out of self-interest. And I'm not saying there would be some grand anarchist movement or utopia or society or whatever, but certain things about that stateless society would benefit these people, and they would just slowly that sounds good or whatever, various a new technology that people find that works or whatever the thing, they just go over to it. They don't go over to this new technology because they fucking believe in it. It works better for them than the old thing. So I can see it happening. That's the way I would see anarchism coming about, is not some sort of grand shift in everyone becoming some sort of philosophical anarchist, just that we start building these places in the cracks and slowly people trickle over and see I just called us all nerds, right?
Yep.
Okay, so when me and you were kids, Brian, nerds got pushed in the fucking lockers. Now everybody's you've made this fucking point before. Now everybody's into this shit.
Yep.
You know what I'm saying? In the span of 20 years.
Yeah.
So it could be that 50, 100 years from now, I don't think it's going to happen in our lifetime or our children's lifetime or anything like that, but people just slowly shift over, or it becomes more acceptable, or more people are into it, or we're just doing cool shit over here. So people just sort of slowly gravitate to the cool shit we're doing over here. You know what I mean? Not because they read fucking Stirner or who cares, Rothbard, Konkin, Kropotkin, pick your poison. It's not because they read any of that shit. They just saw like, wow, that's some cool shit going over there. We're gonna go over there, and that's all there. I mean, that's all there is to it, really.
Yeah, I think that those groups are always going to be small, like that are over here just doing the cool shit. Those kind of groups I think can thrive, but it's always going to have to be small. There's, I hear you. I get what you're saying, and how there are like sea changes. Part of the in fact, at some point we got to do that episode about the history of libertarianism, and as the recent history, which I think is really interesting. Because one of the major reasons that I think libertarianism kind of died around 2015, 2016, a lot of people want to point at, well, they all became Trump supporters. There's some truth to that. But I think another big part of it is that marijuana suddenly got legalized in many, many, many parts of the United States. And yeah, I'll piss some people, if we're going to get crucified, let's go all the way, give me another nail here. I think, yeah, well, I'm just going to say, I think most libertarians were just potheads that, as soon as it got legalized, they didn't give a shit anymore. Their war was won and they're done, and in one sense, that's fine. I don't care. People can do whatever the fuck they want and think however the fuck they want. Like, I really don't care. But in the other sense, that kind of speaks to the point. Like, no, just hit my pleasure button and I'll be fine, and that's part of that. For me, that speaks to this overall issue, in that there are a lot of people who, again, couldn't handle this life, who really, like, there are just very simple things that they're going after. And as long as they get that, they're fine. Now, could the overarching structure be anarchistic that would allow for that? I suppose, but I've seen far too many cases within the libertarian movement where, okay, so part of the reason why does politics fail? Why does democracy fail? Is it because it's, two wolves and a sheep? Sure. On a logical level, that's what it's about. At the same time, I think what it's also about is it is a system that works well for sociopaths. The reason why money is a popular thing isn't because it's a great system for a medium of exchange. I mean, you could argue that it is, but it's because it allows sociopaths to have value that they don't have internally, right? Like, I love the old Benjamin Franklin saying, the only people afraid of a world without money are scoundrels, because then the only value they have is what's within themselves, and they don't have any. And so I've seen it far too often where, oh yeah, we're going to practice our little, in New Hampshire, in Michigan, and wherever, we're going to practice our little anarchist society or something. And all it takes is one fucking sociopath to come in and, starts doing something. I mean, all kinds of nasty stuff, be it, sexual impropriety. And I don't mean, butt fucking. I mean, like, non-consensual stuff. Because butt fucking's fine. Who just comes in and eliminates the entire system of trust that's had within, whatever size the group happens to be. So if you don't have some kind of, and I don't mean ostracism, I'm not a proponent of ostracism, but if you don't have some kind of, well, to use the term like you used earlier, I mean, gatekeeping is a loaded term, but I'll rock with it. If you don't have some kind of gatekeeping, there's always going to be somebody that comes in and just wrecks the shit. And it happens in every system that humanity's ever devised. So again, I love the old Kim Stanley Robinson quote of, you can't get 5 people together without one idiot. And I think that's certainly true. And I'm not saying it's because people are necessarily unintelligent. But I always feel like anything like that, when it gets big enough, the people that can take advantage of that are going to come in. And that's part of why, I mean, so you have two things. One, and then that person, how do they end up staying in power? Well, they stay in whatever that power happens to look like by appeasing the masses with whatever opiate they want. And that could be religion. It doesn't have to be drugs. So I guess ultimately what I'm saying is this is, well, I'm just, just resetting my point on the idea that I just don't think anarchism will ever be for anyone or for everyone. And I don't even think that I don't think that an anarchist setup could even become worldwide and still like appease everybody for what they want, because someone's going to move in, and anyway, what do you got, Penguin?
No, I'm really glad. I'm actually really glad the conversation went to where it goes. I don't have much to add to that. I think that's a great explanation. Because I'm not really into the mysticism, esotericism aspect, but what you're talking about now, like, I mean, I think that, if you ever have more freedom or a breakdown of structures or a breakdown of, imperial states, centralized states, some level of political decentralization, varying levels probably of political decentralization. And to say that the anarchism ultimately can be considered like an absolutist opinion, but it can also be like, you can have different opinions on different things. And anarchy can also be described as, chaos and violence and whatever, but it can also be described as like, when systems and societies are anarchistic, in the sense that there is a spectrum that when things are anarchistic, more or less anarchistic, when they when they display less top down and more kind of spontaneous order, more person to person interaction, and stuff like that, less coercion and so on and so forth. And there's, I think, a wide spectrum on that obviously, even when you have sort of a absolutist ideal that most anarchists will say is kind of the key to the whole thing. And I think you can have like a what I call like a mechanical, I'm not sure exactly what I usually call it, because it's kind of a term I've been kind of thinking on, like a mechanical liberty or mechanical anarchism, because we're usually talking about the anarchism as in the anarchy that's described in, like, for example, IR theory, like that you have an anarchy because there isn't a higher force this got or whatever higher force or higher forces there are don't have the capacity to necessarily that what's called state capacity, they don't have necessarily the capacity to impose top down, and that can, but in the sense that could exist to various degrees, without saying there will be no state. Well, there's not going to be. There will be absolute equality throughout the world. There will be absolutely no hierarchies. There will be absolutely no race. Absolutely no racism. Excuse me. There will be no. It's not. There will be no state, and there will be no state that forms, and there will be forever. Whatever, and by whatever definition of state that you kind of will use, and obviously there's not that. So obviously there is actually a spectrum of a level of decentralization, a level of lack of state structures and capacity for rulership and stuff like that. In practice, and if you want to measure it by that and not by this kind of absolute, then I think obviously you can see that, and you can see the kind of ideas that kind of anarchists kind of deal with, like people that are actually philosophically or politically anarchists, as being useful for that kind of situation. Just exploring these topics and exploring that kind of lifestyle, and there's kind of a lot of diversity there too, but it can be useful for the situation where it's mechanistically, like, just not, I don't know what the word exactly should be, but I kind of use like mechanical or mechanistic, like there are not those structures. There is a level of decentralization. It's not a stateless, not necessarily absolute statelessness. It's not a black and white, but there aren't those structures that exist. And I think, again, a good way to look at that is the anarchy of like IR theory, where, basically states are the highest level essentially of like legitimate authority. I mean, they're supranational entities, and likewise, they don't actually have the authority that they're not actually on a higher level of authority in reality. The nation state is technically the state is at the highest level of authority, and so they interact in a certain way based on that versus the way people will interact necessarily under government and so forth. I think, like I said, so these ideas, that rightfully so, it's not going to be an idea that's spread throughout the entire population. This is going to be a situation that people live in and exist in to some degree or another, if and when if and when and where it occurs. It's not going to be a philosophy where, as you point out, most people are not even adopting a philosophy, or certainly not adopting a philosophy that has this kind of political implications and so forth. So it's different to say anarchy and anarchist. It's a very different thing, I think. I mean, when you're saying I am an anarchist a la Proudhon, that's a very strong statement, and he's a man of thought and words. And when you say anarchy, that's a situation that people exist in, and that's something you can theorize on how that actually plays out, not just philosophically but practically. But when it comes, and it's a situation that people do spontaneously figure out how to deal with, but can they be helped by theory and ideas, and maybe actually adopting ideas that they would not have spontaneously come up with by putting those ideas in the marketplace of ideas? Absolutely. So I think there's usefulness to discuss things that are explicitly and implicitly anarchist, philosophically, but the actual situation of anarchy is a situation that kind of arrives in the physical world by like the state of affairs, which how do you get there without everybody being philosophical anarchists or so forth? I mean, that's another kind of state. But again, do you necessarily get there? Do you get there through some kind of great disaster or great, global warfare? And then hopefully not. But do you get there through having a kind of a substrate under the system where people are just kind of doing without the state because they see that as less necessary, given like where society's at, where what their capacity is, like its usefulness, I guess, in people's day-to-day lives. And I mean, you go to another place. I mean, we have a problem with the American state for certain reasons in the Western, like Western developed, fully integrated states. But go to a place like Niger or like Tajikistan or some place like that, and ask them, or even a country as developed as Iran, in many cases, ask them their opinion of like state power and what it's like to go get, you think about the DMV here, go ask them what it's like to get a permit, and just, yes, you have to deal with some bureaucracy here, and sometimes you can deal with the local government that can have some kind of mean-spirited people on the board, and you might have some local politics to deal with. Over there, like, you don't deal with a cop, you don't get a permit without jumping through some hoops. That's the world they live in, is a world of like Byzantine tyranny, not just even just regular, you've got to, pay the chief 10% of your money tyranny. So
Brian's got a scoop.
Okay. Well, I think you get in a situation where people kind of, do without the state in kind of, really, I guess a better way to put it is the Rothbardian sense, from Anatomy of the State, where it exists not as a form of like direct tyranny. It exists because it maintains a crucial level of support from people, not because they're brainwashed and not because they have the wrong ideas about things. I mean, these are self-interested, ultimately, people, and they might have their own, ethos or like own ideas that they cling to, like nationalism and other things. But ultimately, it has the support of people for reasons. What will we do without it? What's the counterfactual? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But you do also see like a more direct tyranny in places where the state offers a lot less conveniences. So if we reach a level of, I don't know, technical sophistication, I mean, I just gotta say, like, global instantaneous communication being pretty much available almost in every country at this point, I think that allows us to kind of do without Byzantine bureaucries, whether there are, in the sense of you might encounter in like Burkina Faso, or whether even the kind of stuff that you have to deal with the American state, which might be a little different in quality and quantity, and it's kind of a different aspect. But ultimately, you are dealing with a centralized authority that exists for some reasons and others, and serves some people in different ways than it serves others.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that the technological infrastructure that we've created today, particularly the internet and so on, is upending a lot of legacy institutions, and I don't mean this in the corny way that like investors and VCs talk about it. I mean in a very real way where I do think that, well, first off, I think we're already in World War III right now. It's just being fought in in a different infrastructure than like stopping the water system, or well, sometimes it might even do that. But anyway, so there's that, but also it is upending like the necessity and the legacy systems, even like, like the voting system or the electoral college, all these concepts that are, pillars in American democracy were made for the horse and buggy. That's the technology it was designed to work with. Okay. As to where that's not how things happen anymore. And, the cracks in that, in these legacy concepts are showing, and it's going to fall apart. And I don't think it's really going to be a very pretty time, but something else is going to come up, within that, that may work with the technological infrastructure that could survive that. I think that's going to happen. I mean, at the end of the day, I think a lot of people, I'm not, okay, first off, I'm not picking on anybody or insulting them for when I said potheads. Like, I don't care. Like that's fine. Rock and roll, I don't know what somebody addicted to coffee is called, but I'm that. But I'm not making fun of that. But also when I say that people are lazy, I don't mean that in a negative connotation. I mean that, like this is how you innovate, is you appeal to people's laziness. Okay. And that's because most people are. And I'm not even saying that that's a bad thing. I'm just saying that's so. And because of that, that kind of speaks to, Penguin, what you were saying about, that government might just take the role of more of a support structure rather than this top-down tyrannical structure, if I understood you correctly. And yeah, I could see that, where there's going to be these systems that just appeal to people's laziness. But I mean, that laziness can be so strong that in some systems, people might feel like, yeah, you're going to have to force me to pay those taxes. I mean, it's just, again, I don't have a grand hope for where all of this is going, but I do believe that people can survive, like Sec brilliantly said. People can survive in the cracks, do all the cool shit in the cracks, and that takes some work, but the pleasure from that is well worth it. And that's what I'm all about, is living in the cracks and thriving there.
All right. Well, that's not exactly what I meant, but that's just as good of a theory as
sure.
That's as good of a theory as as mine. Yeah, for sure. I guess Brian, you got to go. Actually, I got to kind of bounce too. But that was a great convo and a great ending for that. I think. It was actually kind of a crazy topic, but that kind of morphed into an entirely different thing, right?
I want
one quick thing. Go ahead,
Sec.
Let me just toot our horns a little bit.
Yeah.
We can disagree, and it's totally fine.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
I think some people got the impression that you and I were saying some sort of heated argument last time, and then we disagreed again this time. But the way, and I don't want to speak for you, Brian, but the way I see these sorts of things, it's just like these are thoughts that each person has like their own set of experiences and values and all sorts of things and preferences and whatever else. And like these thoughts and ways of doing things are optimal for me. And then Brian has everyone's got their own way of doing things that are optimal for them. Brian's figured out what's optimal for him. There isn't the right answer. I keep saying I don't care. I do care. These are interesting things to talk about. And at the end of the day, it's just like these are there isn't a right answer. There isn't a knowable answer, like whether it's pacifism or anarchism or speculation about the future or any of these things. So there isn't a right answer. So it doesn't do me any good to get like passionately angry that somebody feels a different way about it. It's just like, oh, well, that's the way you got it. That's interesting.
Was that feedback you actually got, or kind of just commentary?
No, I had a number of people describe it as an argument, and that could mean a number of different things. Yeah. But honestly, I think that's great. I want to differ with you more, Sec.
in this podcast. I think that'd make for a better podcast, not a worse podcast, if we differ on things. Like that's like, if anything, we agreed too much on the earlier episodes. Yeah, no, I mean seriously, like same Brian, except like we're all kind of on the same page, except we're not. But you know what I mean? I think that makes for a better podcast in many cases.
Well, to quote Nikki Sixx, to keep this metal, to quote Nikki Sixx, without conflict, life would be pretty boring, wouldn't it?
It's true.
But
we don't have to be dicks at the same time.
No, right. That's the difference. Just don't be a dick. Like that. Really, the key to freedom is just don't be a dick. You know, it's just the problem is most people can't even handle that, or in my opinion. Anyway, but you know, just to assuage this, like, folks, understand, Sec and I, we talk on Telegram literally every day, like pretty much every day. So
yeah, mostly. Yeah.
If you're worried that like, oh man, these guys are at each other's throats. No. But though I do hope that in the next Into the Void, that Sec just like thrashes me on why I'm wrong about this. But but there we go.
Okay. You asked for it.
Bring it on. We got to talk about, I think talking about like the history of at least online libertarianism. I think that's a subject.
I mean,
that
we can go way back if you want to. I mean, you want to go to the Second English Civil War? You know, like.
See, I thought we were talking recent, but I've told you we've got to talk about some of that stuff, because you were talking to me about some of that stuff, like just bits and pieces, Sec, when I first met you, and it's like we've never done that. I could have just picked up a book, of course, but I'd much rather, I don't know, talk about it on the podcast. I love podcasts anyway. I love listening to podcasts, and I like making them.
Hell yeah.
Right, let's do that next time. We'll do a boring history one. That'll be good.
Yeah, shake it up.
Yep. All right, fellas. All right, well, everybody. Brian, thanks for coming on. Everybody listening, be excellent to each other, and peace, fellas.
Peace.